He scrolled past a headline about a market crash, another war, another climate disaster. And then you see a face on the screen who says he knew it all along. He says the chaos was predicted. He says he is the only one who can fix it. And a quiet part of you wants to believe him. But the real reason that Whisper exists is far stranger than you think. It was engineered 4,000 years ago in the dry sands of ancient Egypt. The country had collapsed. The old kingdom, the age of the pyramids, was over. Famine swept through the Nile Valley. Warlords carved up the land. A sense of cosmic order, what the Egyptians called Maat, had evaporated. This was a society that believed its rulers were gods on earth. When the divine order shattered, so did the human soul. From that wreckage, a new king clawed his way to the throne. His name was Amenemhat I. No royal blood ran in his veins. He was a vizier, a bureaucrat who likely orchestrated a coup. The Egyptians had no reason to trust him. He looked like a usurper. But then a strange document began to circulate among the elite. It was a prophecy. The words of a sage named Neferti. Neferti had supposedly lived centuries earlier under the great pyramid builder Sneferu. The papyrus claimed to record his vision of the future, and the vision was terrifying. The Nile would dry up. The land would turn to dust. Foreigners would swarm into the delta. Brother would turn against brother. Social order would invert. The sun disk would be covered over. It was a precise, poetic portrait of the chaos that had just ravaged Egypt. But then, in the text, Neferti saw a turning point. A king would rise from the south. His name would be Ameny. He would restore Maat. He would drive out the enemies. He would be a shepherd to his people. The prophecy called him a savior, a redeemer of the broken land. Every detail of that savior pointed to Amenemhat. The once usurper was suddenly the chosen one. Except the entire thing was a hoax. A team of scribes, likely under orders from Amenemhat, composed the Prophecy of Neferti after he seized power. They wrote it in archaic language, mimicking the style of the Old Kingdom. They gave it a false setting, a pharaoh's court from centuries before. Then they presented it as a newly discovered ancient manuscript. It was a political deepfake from 1990 BC. A historian named Richard Parkinson analyzed the text and found linguistic clues that betray its true later date. Every prophecy of doom was a description of the recent past. Every promise of salvation was a description of Amenemhat's own agenda. The past was rewritten to make the future seem inevitable. A coup was dressed up as destiny. And the Egyptian people accepted it. Not just accepted it. They believed it deeply enough to transform the entire culture. The reason is buried inside your own brain. You might think you are too sophisticated to fall for a fake prophecy. But the machinery that drove ancient Egyptians toward that belief is still operating in your skull right now. Have you ever felt that your life was spinning out of control? A sudden layoff, a personal betrayal, a moment when nothing made sense. In that spin, your brain does not sit idle. It scrambles to stitch fragments together into a story. Psychologists have a name for this: patternicity. It is the human tendency to find meaningful patterns in random noise, and it gets supercharged when you feel uncertain. A researcher named Adam Galinsky conducted an experiment to test this directly. He asked participants to recall an experience where they had absolutely no control. Then he showed them images that were pure static. Those who felt powerless were far more likely to see faces and objects in the randomness. They also became more susceptible to conspiracy theories, and they were more willing to believe in a controlling, coherent narrative. Why? Because a coherent story, even a false one, restores a sense of order. If a savior is coming, the chaos was part of a plan. If a vizier is actually a divine instrument, the collapse was not chaos at all. It was a necessary darkness before a destined dawn. The prophecy of Neferti is not an isolated trick of ancient kings. Across the ancient world, the same playbook ran again and again. When Sargon of Akkad conquered Mesopotamia, he spread the story that he was a baby set adrift on a river, saved by a goddess, destined for rule. When Cyrus the Persian marched into Babylon, he claimed the local god Marduk had chosen him to restore order. Every time, a conqueror became a messiah through the alchemy of a well-told story. And every time, the people believed because they needed to believe. The story was never just about power. It was about belonging. It told each Egyptian, each Babylonian, that their personal suffering had a purpose in a grand cosmic plot. That is what a messiah narrative sells. Not just a king, not just a ruler, but meaning. Now fast forward 4 millennia. The papyrus has rotted. but the pattern is still fresh. You see it in the politician who invokes a mythical golden age he alone can resurrect. You hear it in the CEO who claims he was destined to disrupt an entire industry. You notice it in the self-help guru who says the universe has a plan for your pain. Each one is writing a prophecy in real time. They paint a picture of crisis. They name a villain. They cast themselves as the singular answer. And your brain, when it feels small and scared, reaches for the story like a hand reaching for a wall in the dark. This is not a flaw in your character. It is a feature of your neural architecture. The need for order is so fundamental that your mind will prefer a false story over no story at all. A study by neurologist Michael Gazzaniga showed that when you make a decision, your left brain instantly fabricates a plausible explanation for it, even if the real reason was random. You are the narrator of your own life, and sometimes that narrator is a frantic scribe in Amenemhat's court, making things up to keep the world coherent. So what happens when you recognize this? You might feel a chill. The realization that the stories you are told and the stories you tell yourself are not always true. They are just comforting. But there is power in seeing the mechanism. Because once you see the strings, you can choose not to be a puppet. Think back to Amenemhat. His false prophecy did more than just crown him. It shaped an entire civilization's self-image for centuries. Egyptians began to see their history as an eternal cycle of collapse and rebirth, each new strong king a destined redeemer. Later pharaohs would commission texts that mirrored Neferti, each one a retroactive justification for their rule. The concept of a Messiah, a foretold Savior who arrives at the darkest hour, did not start with the Hebrews or the Christians. It was already a well-worn political tool in the Bronze Age. And the tool worked because it addressed the deepest human fear, the fear that the chaos is permanent, that your life has no arc, that the pain you feel is truly meaningless. Your own need for a savior story emerges in surprisingly small moments. When you lose a job and someone tells you it was the universe clearing space for something greater. When a relationship ends and a friend says you were being prepared for your real soulmate, those are micro prophecies. They reframe your random suffering as a chapter in a heroic tale. They feel good because they give you back your sense of identity. You shift from being a victim of chaos to a protagonist on a quest. This is the same emotional switch that an Egyptian farmer flipped when he heard the prophecy of Neferti. He was no longer a man who had lost his crops to famine. He was a character in Neferti's story, waiting faithfully for Ameny. The story gave him belonging. It gave him a place in the order of things. But there is a shadow beneath that comfort. When a story explains your suffering, it often asks for your loyalty, or your money, or your vote, or your silence. The prophecy of Neferti was not just a poem. It was a demand for allegiance. And it worked so well that Amenemhat founded a dynasty that lasted 200 years. The bloodless coup became a sacred mandate. Historian Jan Assmann called this process cultural memory. He showed how ancient societies actively shaped their past to fit the needs of the present. They were not recording history. They were forging a national identity. So the next time you scroll past a headline that screams of collapse, and a polished voice tells you he foresaw it all, and he was born to save you, you can pause. You can notice the ancient script running beneath his words. The chaos had a purpose, he says. The darkness is already ending because he is here. It worked on the banks of the Nile. It works in your feed. But now you have a choice. You can admire the craftsmanship of the story without handing over your mind. You can feel the pull toward meaning, the human, desperate hunger for a savior, and still ask who benefits. Who sat down and wrote this prophecy? Was it a prophet? Or was it a vizier with a dagger? That question is more important today than ever, because every day you encounter dozens of miniature Nefertis, a sales page that promises your destiny, a manifesto that blames a shadowy enemy, a video that tells you the chaos is about to end if you just follow this one leader. They all use the same ancient incision: open a wound in your sense of safety, then offer a story as a bandage. You scroll past a headline about a market crash, but this time you notice the invisible frame around the letters. This time you see the ancient scribes in the background, chiseling a story to keep you calm. You realize that the savior you were waiting for was written by someone else, and you can put down the script. Your ancestors believed because they needed Maat. You believe because you need the same thing. But the real Maat is not a king's promise. It's a clarity in your own mind when you see the trick for what it is. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. You scroll past the headline, and you are finally free. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to our channel. A new story every week.